I think um, Anthony Farmer, you made great points around Hofstede and his index and the power distance, and I think there's another dimension to that. It's about age. Yes, you're absolutely right, but it's also about power in society, which in the Nigerian context is heavily driven by economics, right? So the relationship to your question about relationship between fathers and sons or children, there's a dependency relationship that starts off, and it's highly economic as well. They send you to school, they do this, they do that. They essentially hold the keys to your life for a period. And then, as Tenny said, it switches. The person holding the keys tends to change. And then the child holds the keys and has to support and so on. My dad is 89 years old now, so he's much older. His brain is as intact as he was when he was 14, I'm sure. But as an individual, he's obviously a lot older. And so we have these conversations around all sorts of topics. And now it's on par. It's no longer so much as him teaching or influencing. It's more about what do you think about this, and and so on and so forth. And I think that full circle would tend to come in life is a natural thing, which for me has been an honor because I also almost didn't notice when it switched. I don't know if that makes sense because
yes.
you're just going. I'm the dad now, and he's the son, and everybody just comes to accept that and to love it. But when that happens, it's a beautiful thing. And as I started, my dad, is by no means perfect, but that's brilliant because who is? I love him not perfect, but because in his imperfection, I learned from that as well. And ultimately, you only have one dad, and so I'll pause it there because it's a great relationship. Many things we could change or do better, but for what we do have, I'm grateful. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, it appears to me that your father, therefore, personifies what Pope Francis was trying to say in terms of the newborn and the shoots of hope for those who are still growing. And so it absolutely makes that point. And also the idea of vertical power, which Teniola also talked about, and the shift down the line, and the power and control that go with vertical power. I think those are things that are particularly strong in our society because of the nature of our culture. Now, Afolashade, you also come from a large family and you have intergenerational siblings. So how did that work out for you? And what did you learn about social relationships from that? What role, if any, do you think your being female played in the establishment of those connections and those relationships?
Good evening. Thank you for having me. Okay, so I'm going to start from the last sentence that you made, saying, what role did being a female? So I have 4 older ones, and they're all boys, well, men. So there's 14, 13, 11, no, 14, 13, 10, and 6 years in between my brothers. So
that is intergenerational.
Very much so. I mean, my oldest brother is almost 60 and I'm 45. So I don't think I was even saying, there was, growing up, nobody was there except for, the one that's just 6 years in between us. And so it was always me and my mom, so to say. And then as I grew older, so by the time I turned 10, 11, 12, my brothers had finished university, they would come around. And, being female, it was expected that you be I was domesticated very early. So the role that I played in their lives were like the cook, clean up after them, take care of the house. So that was the relationship that we had, especially when we started having children. And then you went from sister to cook to then a babysitter. And you didn't even have a say in it. So anybody just it's a weekend, come over. And it was like, yes, there was no other thing to do except for come over. So I think that, the fact that I was the only female defined the kind of relationship. And then, of course, the gap between us, it just defined the relationship from, when I came into being. But of course, as time went by and I grew older, I started to see, I have a mind of my own, I don't have to always be available to make the meals or to maybe babysit because I was now an adult, but I think it was tough to even understand that. I mean, one of my brothers still calls me by the pet name. Like, it's tough to even see me as an adult, right? And so I guess the mind is already conditioned and that's how, we relate with each other in terms of she's our baby sister. Even though she's about 40, she would always remain our baby sister. Now she has children, but she's still, and now that, okay, so I'm older, right? So it's no longer about maybe cook for us, babysit. Even when it comes to decision making, it's tough. It's tough to think she can make sense. It's tough to think she can really add value because everyone has been used to telling her what to do, right? So now it's like, this little girl, how can she, does she know what she's saying? But this little girl don't need it anymore, right? She's a mom, she's a wife, she is a lawyer, she has employees, she has people that look up to her. So I think for me, being female, being the last of, 4 siblings, really did define my life for a very long time. And I'm hoping that I've been able to, get them to see me. I mean, I'm not there yet, but I think that it's getting better.
Okay, thank you. Now the thing I hear that is really strong is the issue of gender. And this is not surprising to me because we live in a patriarchal society. And then when you add that to an age difference and you're the only female, the stage was set for what it is that you describe. And it's totally unintentional because it's a conditioning that we all have, societal conditioning, which it's our responsibility to change in any event. And I also hear what you say about, in those circumstances, struggling to find your voice. At the best of times, each one of us struggles to find a voice. But when you don't have a voice at all, and you're expected not to have a voice, so who is telling you, therefore, that there's a voice you can have? So that must have been something that you came to on your own. And having found your voice, you haven't looked back. So Tanya, let me come back to you. We always talk about things as if it's always parents directing. It takes two to tango. What do you think young people can do towards promoting these connections, particularly teenagers and young adults? And at what point should they themselves begin to take ownership? You can blame your parents for as long as you like, but really, what about you? So can you speak to those issues, please?
Absolutely could. Thank you. I think it's a great point you made about it taking two to tango. And the fact that blame can't be kind of just projected one way for a long period of time. I think, particularly for teenagers and young adults, the problem goes a bit deeper than just the dynamic. I think it's also has to do with interests, things like that being different. And as a result, that makes it harder to actually build a valuable relationship just with someone, right? Okay, so key components for a relationship, generally speaking, a lot of people will tell you things like common interests. We need to have something to talk about. We need to have something that we're able to, converse on, that sort of thing. I think for teenagers and young adults, we tend to have this picture of adults that they are in a lot of ways far from us in terms of like how they think, the things that they're interested in. We may think, or they want to talk about stuff like, I don't know, politics, economics, etc., which we may have our own opinions on, but there might actually be feelings of inferiority when it comes to those matters because we think actually we don't know it as well as they do. But I think a key kind of solution to that, which I've found anyway, and I say solution as if it's something I've figured out, it is something I'm trying to learn, is you realize that adults, particularly the ones in your life, and, so probably your parents, right? It's probably starting with them, are human beings too. And so because they're human beings too, they're not just these robots that want to talk about politics and stuff like that. There are things that are important to them that's not that. There are things, components to their character that are not just those things, as in like sitting on a couch and reading the newspaper on a Sunday afternoon, right? So that kind of ties into the human experience and understanding that each human being actually has multi-facets to their being. And so if you're able to see past just what you think they could be and actually see them for who they are, what their experiences are, what their character is, then you're able to immediately actually build a better connection with that person.
I really like the answers you've given because there are three things that arise from that. The first is what I call generational cultural differences. We might think that it's just national culture, but it isn't, because different generations are different. We think differently. We look at things differently, and it always affects the way, therefore, in which we relate. For example, a lot of people of my generation like going into work. The idea of remote work is an aberration, and the idea that you cannot see your subordinates and your seniors. And we understand the difference that it makes in terms of connecting with people when you see them. And so that's one thing that we have got right. It's bad enough that when you see people, you don't make good connections, let alone when you don't see them at all in the digital space. So you are digital natives, and you think in that way, and it's automatic. We are not. And so some of the things you say, and your tolerance level is much higher than ours. And so there are all these cultural differences which add to the challenges of human relationships and the human experience. The other thing as well for me is that children tend to forget that their parents have insecurities as well. And this is the thing that you talk about in terms of how we relate. But we are all insecure to different extents and for different reasons. And it's important to remember that. And as you get older and your parents realize you're getting more independent, the idea of becoming less relevant in your life begins to make them react in a certain way. And so it's something that perhaps young people also need to look at. And so at this point, let me ask the three of you, each of you in turn, and I'm going to start with Afolashade. And when you've answered the question, I'd like Ayobami to talk about this particular question, and then Teniola. Now, these family intergenerational connections and relationships set us up for our relationships in life. And so let's start with school. How was school? How was school? How did growing up in your families set you up for school? How did you respond to the new relationships that you had? One of the things I say to people is that you don't go to school for knowledge, because you can stay at home and acquire it. You learn, you go to school to socialize. And social well-being is a function of being able to socialize. So can you speak to how you were able to navigate the relationships, still intergenerational, with your seniors, with your juniors, with your teachers in school? So Afolashade, I'll start with you.
Okay. So with my teachers, it was easy. We had a great relationship. I guess, when you grow up being very responsible, being dutiful, obedient, you'll get on with your teachers, because those traits come. I mean, every teacher wants a very, that I found it was very easy to become class captain, to be the one that was always, I got to school very early because we lived quite far off. And so I got on great with my teachers, because they represented my parents, sort of. My parents also had me when they were quite advanced in age. So it was easy with teachers, but it wasn't so easy with my peers, because I kind of like grew up almost like an only child. I told about my siblings had moved on by the time I came around. So I didn't really, I was very used to my own space, very comfortable in my own space. So it wasn't very easy for me to engage with my peers, because I was comfortable with just being alone. So in terms of making friends, it wasn't that easy. With seniors, I didn't have issues, because it was more like, look, I have older ones at home, so I know how to respect. When you know how to respect your seniors, you don't get into trouble. So I was loved by seniors. I was loved by my teachers, because right from home, it was easy. I was trained to be respectful, to be dutiful, not to argue. So that went on. But my peers wasn't such a great one.
Really interesting. It's really what you're saying is that the fact that you grew up with so many generations in your family set you up for success with people older than you. Absolutely. And so it made it difficult, because you then didn't know how to develop connections with those your age. What about those younger than you? How did you fare? Because you don't have anybody younger than you in your house.
I think that when you grow up alone, sort of, the issue is, how do you relate with those on your level? You don't have any. It's
okay.
With the young ones it was easy as well.
Okay.
Because then I was like a mother, like mothering them, sort of. So yeah.
So it's your horizontal relationships that were a problem, not your vertical relationships.
Yes. No.
Okay, then Ayobami, what was your experience?